So thank you for joining us this evening at our third North Carolina Community Class event. We're so excited to have you here at the North Carolina History Center. And for those of you that I've not had the privilege of meeting, my name is Chrystal Regan, and I'm the Executive Director here at Tryon Palace in the North Carolina History Center. Tonight's program is the third component of a three-part series of our inaugural North Carolina Community Class series here at Tryon Palace, and it has been a tremendous success. So this is, yes. Through the North Carolina Community Class series at Tryon Palace, we want to enhance public understanding of the region's historical complexities. Each lecture has featured outside experts discussing a wide variety of topics, providing in-depth insights into overlooked aspects of our history, particularly in Eastern North Carolina and the past. We do have a foundation table here tonight, and if you feel compelled to give more than the $10 that you paid, we'd love to take your money. Yes. These things require participation, they require finances, and for those of you who have given to this, we are especially appreciative. I want to take a moment to acknowledge Bob and Carol Mattocks, who have supported, there they go, right there. Bob and Carol, who supported this initiative when I first got here. They believed in the importance of community engagement, and they supported the idea of the community class series, so I am very grateful to those individuals. So what I'd like to do now is the first component will be a cultural demonstration. And I would like your attention and your reverence for the individuals who are about to come before you next. I want to introduce Mr. Kea Little Turtle. Kea is the Cultural Festival Coordinator at the North Carolina Museum of History. And I want to, and I take pride in this because I got a chance to hire Kea. And Kea is the first permanent American Indian educator at the North Carolina Museum of History. Long overdue. Long overdue. He is an educator and he is a cultural keeper of North Carolina's Indigenous history and America's Indigenous history, particularly in Eastern North Carolina, and an amazing artist and presenter. Kea is here with Chloe Green and Ethan Oxendine. And so Kea is going to come before you, introduce his counterparts, give us a short presentation, and then I will give you further instructions about the rest of the evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Une waga hef gagorihwa ye gihre genike orihwa. Une hesne na we toin yaga we da nini yaga gweni. Eswadiga guatne genige digen wadak ya nyeru. Koniko skaskene rihwa gahye negenene herate disne yegriho dance une gehwe wagwast honey de gahyes honey uchat nyawe. My name is Kea Little Turtle, Gatanawaga Tuscarora. I've brought some of my family members with me. And something that I'm really proud of is that we're going to be showcasing some of our original songs and dances that I know for a fact were sung and danced on the very grounds that we're sitting and standing on right here in this moment in these lands that are now referred to as New Bern. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to share what in our language we would refer to as wagwastu nekwa, or good medicine. Medicine's anything that makes you well, whether it be spiritual, physical, emotional, all those different things are medicine. The history that we teach, that education that we talk about and that we disseminate out amongst the minds of the people, that in essence is medicine because it helps people to think. It helps to uplift and enrich their minds and their interactions with one another and their interactions with their self. So first and foremost, we're going to start with what we refer to as Eskenye Gainose, and this comes to us from our creation story. back when there was no land here and it was all just water. And up above that water world was a place in English we refer to as sky world. And a woman fell from that place. And she was placed on the back of the great snapping turtle. And there was mud that was brought up to her from the bottom of water world. And it said that many of those water animals lost their life in those attempts to get that mud up to her. But eventually, after those many attempts, mud was brought to her, and she had seeds that she had kept from her descent down from Skyworld. And she took that mud and those seeds, and she placed it together on the back of that great snapping turtle. And she began to shuffle her feet and dance that mud and those seeds across its shell. And as she danced and as she shuffled her feet, land began to form from her movements. She danced all of creation into being. This is a very important dance, and we still do this in our Ganasheski and our Longhouse communities back home in the Robeson County area. Of course, amongst the Tuscarora, amongst the Lumbee, there's steps with this dance that has its influence from the Tudlo Saponi people. So we're really, really proud that we still have some of our original songs and dances still being done in the lands that's now referred to as North Carolina. We're going to ask Miss Chloe Green, if she would, to step forward, and you're going to see her shuffling her feet during this women's dance, calling back to that time when Sky Woman danced all of creation into being. This dance and these songs help to express the importance and the power of our women, because every single one of us sitting and standing here in this moment are here first and foremost because of our mothers who gave birth to us. And so this dance respects that and honors that, and it talks of that birth and that creation. Eskenye gaino se hune wagahe. So now at this time, we're going to go into Wasaze, or old style war dance. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and also what we have on, because we frequently get questions about what we wear. First and foremost, a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated a fun holiday called Halloween. And during that time, many people had costumes on. And so we never refer to what we have on as a costume, because we're not pretending to be Indigenous people. We are Indigenous people. In English, the commonly agreed upon word is regalia. In our language, we would say une diastahetwe, which is to say our real original clothes. Some of the questions that we get directly following that is, but you're not in the skins of the animal. You're not just wearing animal leathers. And I'd say, well, of course, what we have on, our une diastahetwe, represents a time after contact, when we started to trade for the fabrics. And then usually the question I get after that is, why? And I always respond back with, why not? So it's no different than if you walk in JCPenney's and you see an outfit and you like it and you buy it because you feel like you're going to look good in it. Well, our people, thought taught some of the very same things. It was a matter of convenience. It was much easier for us to be able to trade for those fabrics and adorn ourselves with those things and those Czechoslovakian cut glass beads and those various different adornments that we traded for than it was to go through the rigorous process of brain tanning the leathers to make it soft enough for us to wear. So first and foremost, it was fashion and convenience. I think we still operate in those same mindsets today. I know that I do as it pertains to the clothes that I buy. On top of our heads, we do have on a Iroquois-style, Tuscarora-style Gaston. This is a relatively new style of feather cap. It's not something that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's actually more of a modern teachings that are associated with this feather cap. But the different Longhouse nations all have their own variations of Gaston. So a Tuscarora Gaston would not look the same as a Mohawk Gaston or the same as a Cayuga Gaston. All those different feather head caps are made to signify what nation that you're from. So now at this time with this wasaze, this old style war dance, this has its roots in our thunder dance. These songs and dances that we attribute to our Yagualiasut Hitne Gehaga, our grandfathers, the thunder beings. We have a deep relationship with the thunderstorms that enter into our lands. It was said that when our people were very first starting to walk here on Ene Ufne, on Mother Earth, there were spirits that walked alongside them on these lands, and that some of them were good and some of them were not so good, and they brought harm, sickness, and death to our people, and that the Creator sent our grandfathers, those thunder beings, to be warriors on our behalf, and took those heavy spirits away from us and put them deep into the ground. It was time that a thunderstorm comes through and that lightning strikes. It's one of those spirits trying to resurface to bring us harm, but the thunderstorms are still doing their job and not allowing that to happen. We keep those traditions strong in our tribal communities back home. When thunderstorms still roll into our lands, we're quiet. We do not usually have the TV on. We're not cooking on the stove. We're definitely not going to go and take a shower. You might get electrocuted. But we have some really strong communal and generational teachings for how we are supposed to behave when those thunderstorms come into our communities. And there's a deep cultural and spiritual aspect to that. It actually is said that some of these original songs that we sing came from us trading with some Suan speakers outside of the Ohio Valley. And so we incorporated some songs there that we were actually at odds with one another outside the Ohio Valley, and we sat and we talked and we exchanged songs and we incorporated some of their songs into our war dances. So now at this time, you're going to see Mr. Ethan Oxendine with the Wasaze. Hanyo ne wagahe. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gawaiagit, or smoke dance. Now, if you go and you Google smoke dance, I'm going to tell you what Dr. Google says. I try not to Google things too much. I have a love-hate relationship with Google. I tell crowds sometimes, I'm one of them people that when I get sick, I Google my symptoms. And that's not a good thing to do. I don't Google too much if I can help it. But if you go and you Google smoke dance, it'll say that this was a dance that was done in the longhouse, where they would dance so fast around the fire. And we'd dance the smoke up out of the top of the longhouse, and that's why it's referred to as smoke dance. And man, that's a cool story. But that's not accurate. That was really a story that was told for tourism. And I like to dispel that sometimes, because there's a lot of inaccuracies as it pertains to the history of smoke dance. I think the actual story of it's a whole lot cooler. So smoke dance first started not here in these lands, but up in upstate New York at Seneca Nation Fair in the 1930s. And it spread up and down the East Coast after that time. But something really cool to know about it was it came from original war dance songs that were no longer being sung. They had been put down for years and years and years. These songs are almost forgotten. And so what they did at the Seneca Nation Fair was they took those old songs and they changed them. They sped them up. They created a new dance. And I think that that's kind of a beautiful way of looking at it, because I think a lot of times us as Indigenous people, we are often labeled a people of the past. But really, we are a people of the present that has deep connections to our past that helps guide us as we walk into the future. So there is a much, much deeper relationship that we have with ourselves and our culture. And our culture is not necessarily something that has to have been 500 years old. Culture is also something that's created every day. And so I think that's a really cool example of how our culture has evolved. And so like I said, it was not created here, but it was created from old war dance songs that we share universally amongst the different longhouse communities. And then it was sped up and it's made its way because of the movement of powwows, these huge intertribal gatherings. Smoke dance has made its way across Indian country and is primarily only done at powwows. We never smoke dance in the longhouse because it was never created in the longhouse. So that's something really good to know. It's a contest, fun style of dance. If it's not being done at powwows, then it's just being done at demonstrations like this. It is the fastest dance in all of Indian country. And we just so happen to have 2 champion smoke dancers with us today. And they're going to come and showcase their style. Where that war dance was originally just for the men, smoke dance became for men and women, oftentimes with women being even faster than the men. But we shall see. Smoke dance, honey, go ahead, get no horn. All right, we're gonna start them with a classic. We're going to give them just a second to catch their breath. And I saw all the looks on your faces. And everybody was just telling me with their eyes, one more. Yeah, see? I was looking at you. Yeah. So we're going to give them one more. And man, Ethan's like, 5 more. And Chloe's like, chill out. But no, we're gonna give them this one more. And then we're going to end our demonstration with some Pigeon Dance songs. But I'm going to give you one more go-I-get note here in just 1 second. I tell you, I sing for smoke dance all the time back home and at other different places. I've been fortunate enough to go and sing up in Wisconsin amongst our relatives with the Oneida and the Seneca. But my adopted brother, Sheldon Sundown from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, he's a smoke dance singer too. So for the last couple of years, I'd been singing smoke dance, not dancing it. And then he had to go for this demonstration that we were doing, this performance, and he was singing it. And so I got an opportunity to go back and smoke dance again. And then I realized, I was like, what have I been doing to people? I got to give them more of a break in between. I'm not being nice. All right. Here we go. I'm going to give them one more short one. Yeah. So now at this time, we're going to go into Pigeon Dance, and that'll be our last set of songs that we're going to share with all of you. I'm going to ask, as Chloe and Ethan's catching their breath, if they'll help me with these. And I was doing a show yesterday, back over in Raleigh at the Longleaf School of the Arts, and I was dancing there as well as emceeing, and I had just got done dancing and had to go right back into talking. I'm like, whoo, all right. So, but right quick as we go into these closing set of songs, I want to say that in our language we'd say "swat the good aguasnik," which is to keep that good mind. I look at all of your faces out here and the different paths of life that I imagine that all of you have traveled, and the experiences that you've had, and the experiences that you're still going to have upon this earth, the things that you know and the things that you're going to learn and be able to share with others. We talk a lot about our uchehe, our fire. Interestingly enough, our word for fire is also our word for family. It's interchangeable. But what we're really talking about when we say uchehe is not necessarily that physical fire that you might have at a campsite or in your home if you have a fireplace. No, we're really talking about what burns inside of you. And every single one of us as human beings have that fire. Now, we encounter different things that can hurt our fire, that can dim our fire. And we go through those various things throughout our lives. Every single one of us has experienced what I'm talking about. And what ends up happening is that as that fire begins to dim, as we go through those struggles, it creates ashes. And those ashes, they get in our eyes and we can't see what needs to be seen. And those ashes get in our ears and we can't hear what needs to be heard when it's being said to us. And those ashes get in our mouth and we can't say what needs to be said when we need to say it. And it's said that our mind gets heavy and it gets on the ground, not easily picked up, and there it lays and it begins to get dusty. Now, what you've seen here this evening is ways that us as Indigenous people remove the dust off of our minds. It's how we reignite our fire, one of many ways, but through our songs and our dances and our stories and our languages, through our history that we know and that we're making every day. It helps us to keep our fires reignited so that those ashes do not build up in all of our senses and cause us to have a which is to say a heavy mind. We don't have a word for bad. And so we're always striving to have that that good mind. And that's what I would encourage and hope for every single one of you, is to have that uplifted mind. And things like tonight is a wonderful way to do that. Spending time with one another, talking about old times, fun times, laughing, smiling, learning. That's how we help, and we have a responsibility to one another, to enrich each other, and to help to uplift and remove that dust from our minds as we encounter that in our path. So, with that being said, we're going to go into the Pigeon Dance songs. This comes to us from the people that was referred to as Tudelo, which was a Iroquois designation for Siouan speakers here in the South, but there is a period of time where us as Gatanawagas, we had disagreements with many of the Siouan speakers, but we put many of those disagreements to rest. It was said that we made peace with the Saponi people, that we made peace with the Catawba people on deer hunting grounds, and that during all these different times of peace, we exchanged songs and dances and goodwill with one another. And these Pigeon Dance songs, and this dance that's associated with it, was one of those things that was exchanged and incorporated into our Ganas Heskie, or our longhouse practices. So we had a deep, deep relationship with the passenger pigeon. All of the Jitne, Gehatne, all the different birds, us as Indigenous people believe that birds are messengers. So all the different birds have really special meanings to us. And so these pigeon dance songs, they might sound a little heavy, but what they're meant to do is to take that good medicine out that we've created in this space and to take it out amongst all of you, for you to carry it with you when you leave from here. And that you spread that good medicine to all the different people that you encounter, and you take it back home with you, and it helps to light up your home fires and your home communities, and it just spreads out in a good, positive way. So at this time now, Pigeon Dance. Hanyo. Yo ajine, oh ajine, yo ajine, oh ajine, yo ajine, oh ajine, weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, aye, weni oh, weni oh, aye, yo ajine, 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 weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, aye, oh, weni oh, weni oh, aye, yo ajine, yo ajine, yo ajine, yo ajine, weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, weni oh, aye, oh, weni oh, weni oh, aye, yo ajine, yo ajine. Yo ha hey hey yo ha hey yo hey hey yo ha hey yo vi yo do kane wa do ha hey oh ha hey yo 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 hey yo ha hey yo vi yo do kane wa do ha hey oh ha hey yo 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 you are Jinana go ha, Jinana go ha, you are Jinana go ha, you are Jinana go ha, Jinana go ha, you are Jinana go ha, you are Jinana go ha, you are Jinana go ha. You are the go you are the go you are the go you are the go you are the go. Thank you. I probably went over my time 5 minutes, so thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We say Yahweh, which is thank you in our language. We don't have a word for bye, so we say Eskege, which means literally that I will see your face again somewhere. Yahweh, thank you.
This is an amazing crowd. I think we have filled Cullman Hall. I think we have. So I'm really excited to introduce, and many of you have been here for the first 3 programs. I think we've got a loyal fan base for the North Carolina Community Class Series. Stick with us. It's only going to get better. And Nancy Chavis has really set the bar for this. Nancy Strickland Chavis has 20-plus years as a museum career educator, and she's focused on museum education and administration. She's worked at the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., and the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum in Oklahoma City. Her current role is as director and curator of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian in Pembroke, North Carolina. And in case you didn't know, that's Robinson County. Not Robinson County, Robinson County. She is the first Lumbee graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, where she earned her bachelor's degree in museum studies. She earned a master's degree in history from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and is currently a doctoral student at the Public History program at North Carolina State University. I can't wait to call her Dr. Chavis. She's already Dr. Chavis. Nancy's area of research focuses on Southeastern Native peoples and the American colonial experience. She is a trustee for the North Carolina Humanities Council and serves as a board member for the Robinson County Arts Council and Museum of the Cape Fear. Nancy, I've mentioned she is already a member of the Lumbee tribe, and her family resides in and around the Pembroke area. She is the curator of the inaugural community class series here at Tryon Palace. And tonight, she is going to focus on the Tuscarora War, and she has a unique ability to reach general audiences and to help us understand the important aspects of our history as North Carolinians, and particularly Eastern North Carolina. We hope that you leave learning more with questions and feeling a little bit more empowered in terms of what it means to be a North Carolinian, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And my hope is that once we conclude this first part of the series, is that you will come back and join us as we move forward chronologically about Eastern North Carolina's history. So with that, Nancy Chavis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is so good to be back with you all this evening and wrapping up the speaker series. This is class number 3. So how many of you were here for the first class? Raise your hands. Very good, very good. Others of you, we will mark you absent, and we'll talk with that after class. Okay, how many of you were here for the second class? Awesome. And the first class? So first and second, just polling. Okay, we'll deal with everybody later. So I mentioned before that my background is in museum education. I had a long desire to be a formal teacher, but that was something that my mom discouraged. And I think it's worth saying because it really ties in today. She said, I don't want you to be a teacher. This was like back in, the early 80s. She said, the only thing we've been allowed to be as Indian women are teachers and nurses, and I want you to be something more. So I stumbled into museum education after she passed, and I hope I've made her proud because I'm trying to do more. So in class 1, if you remember, we spent quite a bit of time humanizing Native people, understanding their connection to place, understanding why people would want to fight for this land and what it meant, their spiritual understandings, their worldview, their governance, the relationships they had with one another, the good and the bad. And we worked really hard on humanizing Native people. And I mentioned in my work that at the Museum of the Southeast American Indian, in fact, whether it's in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or Washington, D.C., or Oklahoma City, or even in Pembroke, North Carolina, sometimes it's hard for people to humanize Indians. There's a very romanticized way of understanding. Indian people, and certainly sometimes we're fixed in the past, but that's not true. These are everyday people who lived lives that had dreams and worries and hopes and tragedies and triumphs and loved one another, hated one another. They made money, they lost money, all the things. And we talked about bounded space in the first class also, which means how environment, where you're from, informs your identity. When Kaya sung tonight with Chloe and Ethan, and they danced, for me it was extremely powerful, and I could tell that you all felt it too. That certainly, like Kaya said, those songs would have been sung here, those dances would have been danced here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I couldn't help but think that not only does this space recognize us when we come back, but he certainly woke up the ancestors tonight. So with that said, I would like for us to take a moment of silence. And as we talk about this history that unfolded right here in this area, and we think about the hundreds of lives that were lost and even displaced from these homelands, that we think about them and honor their memory. And we also honor the living descendants that are with us here tonight and still live in this area. Let's hold them close and honor this story. And let's ask also that they help guide my words and our thoughts together as we go through this journey. If you'll join me. Thank you. Okay, I want to be honest. I think at this point I've formed friendships with all of you. Everybody pretty much knows my presentation style. I get very personal. There is a young lady in the audience. I'm going to give you a cue. We have a warning slide on one of these. I was going to read it, but I'm going to let y'all read it. We're going to get to it here in a minute. But so I started off with, I had 26 slides, okay? I was like, there's a lot to unpack here. So I have pared it way down, and so we are going to cruise through some history really quickly. But I do want to say, if you can get a copy of Dr. David Levere's Tuscarora War, this text is golden. He did such a great job at humanizing the story, telling the names of the actors that were part of this history, and the places and the towns, and just went to lengths. And this is also endorsed by Tuscarora people, both in North Carolina and in New York. And when you've got the seal of approval, that's pretty good. So I recommend the Tuscarora War to really kind of dig deep. And East Carolina University also held a symposium. I think it was about maybe 10 years ago or so, and there are some great essays that are online. If you Google Tuscarora Symposium, East Carolina, you'll see some documents that come up that really dig into what happened after the war, the land leases, and all of this kind of history that we don't have time to touch on this evening. So, because this is a class indeed, we're going to recap. And I might take my coat off. Is that okay? Okay, whoops. All right, so from class one, what we learned is that Algonquin, Siouan, and Iroquoian peoples were culturally, spiritually, and intrinsically connected to this land and waters. Their identity and worldview were informed by this place. This land was their home. Today, it still is revered by many tribes as their homelands, as we felt this evening for certain. And by virtue of economic trade, European contact would forever change their lives, accessibility, and connection to this place. Takeaway from class two. Atlantic trade brokered and influenced both beneficial and corruptive relationships between American Indian tribes and groups. And we addressed that doll in class two, which is the first documented European good in American Indians' hands. And this sort of starts it all. So this is a very important image. These relationships fostered diplomacy, power, autonomy among American Indian tribes, and met a need from colonists to survive in Virginia and the Carolinas, but it economically prospered in a way they called the New World. Without the inclusion and cooperation from American Indians, capitalism in the New World would not have happened. And we looked at native slavery, tobacco, and deerskins as chief resources during that time. As colonies up and down the eastern seaboard began to develop domestic economies, there was less reliance on England and other countries in Europe. Thus, the rumblings of independence began. Many of the native industries were tied to export economies. When the business declined, so did the relationships with native people, and the gaze turned specifically to the acquisition of land. And that's where we will begin this evening. So, as we talk about the Tuscarora War, I think that we're used to understanding kind of settlement in the colonies. We hear about, the different people that came in who were, in the case of the Carolinas, authorized by the Lords Proprietors to begin colonies and to start settlements around these colonies. And it was a very formal type of activity. But we are a little different here in North Carolina, and especially in this region. We talked about, in I think it was the second class, how the Outer Banks posed a problem for us with economics because we didn't have a viable import-export waterway, right? Anybody that's traveled the Outer Banks knows that those sandy shoals and things are ever-changing, and that makes it problematic to have a reliable port. So what happens in North Carolina is we pretty much stay Indian territory into the 1700s. And when we think about Philadelphia, New York, Charleston, St. Augustine, even in the 1600s, these places are getting pretty densely populated pretty quickly. And so what happens in North Carolina is we start having what we call informal settlements. We have folks that are shipwrecked crews. We have folks that are indentured runaways, colonial deserters, pirates, pirate crews that are deserting, right, and running away or been captured maybe in the Caribbean, wanderers, and others, right, because we also know that these folks were having children and creating these sort of scattered populations. And as England looked at North Carolina kind of sandwiched in between Virginia and South Carolina, they weren't too worried about it in the beginning until overpopulation happens, overcultivation happens, there's a domestic economy, and then people start looking at North Carolina and saying, okay, who is in and around these areas? And what these people had, these kind of, what would we call them, like rogue settlements, if you would, is they did have trade goods such as guns and rum, and they traded these with Indians. And again, before formal trade was established, and by the time formal trade is established in the 1600s, indigenous peoples of the region desired Indian goods. They really wanted cooking pots. They wanted the guns. They wanted the rum. They wanted the beads. They wanted all of these things that were transforming their lives. And I think Kay touched on that a little bit tonight when he was talking about his clothing. And thinking about going from wearing buckskin, kind of Indian clothes that we would think of pre-contact to more cloth, beads, bells, things like that post-contact. So even then, unfair trade, disputes, and the unregulated trade. We see the Lords Proprietors, a lot of their work that happens once they are seated it's unregulated and very kind of rough and tumble in the area. And so native and non-native people are already kind of grumbling among one another. Now in class 2, we talked about how important it was in the 1600s and the 1700s to have good relations with native peoples if these settlements could, because if there was a neighboring tribe that they could use as a buffer tribe, that would protect them from their neighbors. Well, this kind of scenario sort of complicates that a little bit for North Carolina. And it falls out through unscrupulous treatment against Indians was commonplace by the 1700s in eastern North Carolina. Native peoples reacted in ways to defend themselves and to maintain power and control of their land and lives. And the settlement of towns such as Eatonton, Bath, and even Newbern further complicated these tensions. And then we'll look at how the Tuscarora War would forever change how North Carolina regarded Indians. So you've already got sort of these problematic relationships among these early settlements with native peoples, and then you have the formal settlement of towns. And one of the first, of course, was Edenton, which is just about 100 miles north. So what that signaled when Edenton was settled was that, okay, people are coming in, and what does it mean for the Indians that are still here now? We know what that's looked like for Native peoples just across the line in Virginia, and we certainly know what that meant for Native peoples that were living in and around South Carolina, which people were already scattering in the late 1500s and 1600s because of Native slavery and the sugar industry. So many people were captured into slavery and sent away to places like Barbados to cultivate sugar. We talked about a really devastating and hard to digest statistic in that the average lifespan of a Native person who was sold out of the port of Charleston or Georgetown, South Carolina, and we were sold as merchandise. We weren't sold like with African slavery, chattel slavery, where it was one individual at a time. We were sold in lots of 50. So you can look at these ship manifest and see, barrels of salted fish, different types of perhaps, boxes of nails, naval stores, and 5 lots of 50 Indians each. So that's kind of hard for us to quantify how many Native people were engaged in Native slavery, but nonetheless, we know that they were, and that they were sent away. That also impacted the relationships that were in North Carolina, and some people had even come here to seek refuge from South Carolina and even Virginia. Now, we'll say the story's not a perfect story, no history is, and the Tuscarora were heavily engaged in Native slavery, which we'll talk about that real briefly. So that further complicated relations here in this region, even with not only non-Native folks, but Native folks. So as we are kind of just understanding what we're going to work with here and talking about the tensions, the war, and the legacy, I want to say, and I want you all to think about these last 2 bullet points. The Tuscarora War would forever change how North Carolina regarded Indians. And secondly, it was only in the 20th century that the legacy of the war began to lift and Indians could identify, and that should have said without persecution and ridicule. Certainly not in my mother's lifetime, who died in 1996, who was still afraid to tell people that she was an Indian, where people still sought refuge and sanctuary in our Native communities, such as Pembroke, Maxton, Rowland, Hollister, all of these Indian towns that are still scattered throughout North Carolina. Okay, so let's begin to unpack this history. And I want us just to look at, as we think about humanizing this story, who were the actors? I broke the PowerPoint rule. I did it. I own it. You can't read it. So I'm going to go through a little bit of it for you. And I can share this with Chrystal, and it is recorded, okay? What rule did I break here? Thank you, okay. I knew, I seen your faces. Okay. These are the main actors. There are many, many others, but we are just kind of, for the sake of setting the stage here, we are going to understand who we're talking about. So, and this isn't in any particular order because these guys are all over the place. So Tuscarora Chief Hancock, he led the Southern Tuscaroras in the Tuscarora War, and he was allied with the Bear River tribe, the Corey, the Cothaichi, I'm so terrible at pronouncing these names, the Machaponga, the Mattamuskeet, the Noose, the Pamlico, the Senqua, and the Weetalk, among many others. And so he used those allyships to his advantage, especially before the Tuscarora War, and how they were dealing with those tumultuous relationships we just talked about. Okay, Tuscarora Chief Blunt, leader of the Northern Tuscarora. He was really centered around this area of New Bern. He was best known for his role not only in the war, but he allied with the British colonies of North Carolina and South Carolina, and his allies in other tribes also supported him. And he also plays a role in capturing Chief Hancock, which we will talk a little bit about that. King Charles II We all know quite a bit about King Charles II, and after the execution of his father, he comes into power, but also is that he is the one who authorizes the Lords Proprietors of the Carolina, rather. The Lords Proprietors were 8 Englishmen who King Charles II granted by Carolina charters of 1663 and 1665 the joint ownership of a tract of land in the New World called Carolina. All of these men either had remained loyal to the crown or had aided Charles's restoration to the English throne. So this is really important, right? Because we can already see here in the New World how English politics are factoring into the landscape. So it's important to look at both King Charles and the Lords Proprietors. So these men were Edward Hyde, Earl of Clarendon, George Monk, Duke of Albemarle, William Earl Craven, John, Lord of Berkeley, Anthony Ashley Cooper, and Sir George Carteret. So sorry. But we see how these names live on among our place names, our counties, our communities, our river names. And so their legacy is still echoed among us, even if we don't know all of the full stories about them. And then, of course, we have Christoph von Graffenried. Some people say Graffin, some people say Graffenried, but we know that he is the founder, of course, of New Bern and this wonderful town that we are in. Had a little bit of engagement with the Tuscaroras that proved a little problematic. We're going to talk about that. And then John Lawson, explorer, adventurer, naturalist. He picked the absolute worst job for an Englishman to have in the New World, and what was that? A surveyor. I'm going to tell you what an Indian doesn't want to see on their land. That's a surveyor. Because they're looking for land, and that proved to be problematic in his future. So, messy politics and messy relationships. Okay, I was feeling this earlier. I was like, I'm going to say it, and Chrystal said I was empowered, but because we have a young lady in the audience, we're not going to say it. I'm not going to. You should care, honey. These are bad words. You are a good Southern girl. Cover your ears. I bet you can read. Cover your eyes. All right. So I really wanted to show this because this is actually out of you're reading it. Can you tell I got that? I'm also a grandma, so I know how to. Grandma senses are way better than mom senses. I'm gonna tell you, because then you can also like look away. You're like, I see it, but I'm not gonna do about it. Okay. So this is an exchange between King Luther and settler William Powell, and this is in Dr. Levere's book. And so I'll just skip over the bad words, but essentially, living on the coast, the Bear River Indians gained their reputations as looters and of beach ships, sometimes willing to attack stranded sailors. In 1699, the North Carolina government tried to make them into tributaries and demanded they stop their attacks and plundering. They should also pay 2 deer skins every July and to the general court as tribute. But old habits were hard to break, and in 1701, Thomas Amy charged that the Bear River Indians, who were serving as canoe guides, had pulled guns and bows on his party and threatened their lives. The Indians told a different story than Amy and his friends. I'm sorry, and I did voice recording on this, obviously. This is where I went back and edited those 26 slides. Where Amy and his friends had gotten them drunk on rum, and when the Indians heard the Englishmen talking about the Ashley River, in South Carolina, they feared they were going to be enslaved, jumped out of the canoe, spilling 3 of the Englishmen's guns into the water in the process. So even talking about the Ashley River to Native peoples, they knew these guys might try to entrap us and send us down to Charleston or Georgetown for slavery. So even hearing that, they kind of freaked out, right? But things only got worse. In the fall of 1704, settler William Powell complained that King Luther and 16 Bear Indians looted the cabin of all his ammunition and other items. King Luther said that he was doing this because he heard the English were going to cut them off. So we talked about just a minute ago how they were already kind of entrapped among one another for goods and supplies. So this is like not huge formal trade of like taking deer skins to the Winyah factory like we talked about last time. These are just a couple of guys who are probably neighbors that are kind of bickering and arguing over goods. So when Powell protested, Luther told Powell that he might Yes, can y'all see that? And that Powell was close your eyes, and said that they would burn my house, and when it was light moon, they would gather my corn and ye Englishmen's corn. And by the summer of 1711, the moon had come, and the Bear River patience had run out. So we can see, even where it's not necessarily formal relationships between governments, if you will, between native governments and English or other European governments. These guys are bickering boots on the ground, right? Okay, so declining relations. Now, this is a photograph of, and out of respect for native people, Algonquin peoples, and also Tuscarora religious beliefs, we're going to just call this an effigy. I'm going to say a deity, but that's really not the word I want to use, but we'll go with that. So traditionally, these were painted red and black. Red on one side, black on the other side. And what that represented was duality and balance, and had very spiritual understandings among native people. Well, de Graffin was in a Tuscarora village, and he came across these posts, and he thought, because what are the colors that Graffin Reed, has for the Swiss colony for New Bern were what? Red and black. So he thought that they were enticing him. He thought that they were going to try to go after him, or the colony rather, and he thought that it was slanderous. So in his own interpretation of what he thought he was looking at, and not even thinking about the indigenous meaning of what these effigies represent, he vandalized it and destroyed it. Yeah. Now, can you imagine if you had a visitor that came into, and I'm a Southerner, so of course I'm going to bring church into this, let's say a statue of the Virgin Mary, and someone misinterprets what she represents and on the spot takes it personally as an affront to them and then destroys it, a lot of people are going to be upset, right? So von Graffenried, being new to the area, and then Tuscarora people seeing this act that was, they regarded as violence against them, as sacrilegious, as just a complete blasphemy that he would do that, already had questions about his character. And I think rightly so, right? This is a religious effigy, and they were very upset about it. And that sort of is the undercurrent of the rumblings between where Tuscarora people start questioning von Graffenried, I cannot say his name this evening, and what the colonies were really about. So, everybody knows that surveyors, trying to make sure I'm on time here, surveyors were known for counting links, right? So they would put out this chain and count the links of chain for how much land that they were surveying. So one evening, or one afternoon rather, Graffenried suggests to Lawson that they should go up the Neuse River and just kind of scope out some lands in the area, and really just take a leisurely kind of ride. Later on, von Graffenried would give a testimony that they were looking for wild grapes, which were probably muscadines, and that it was just an innocent journey up the river. Well, that innocent journey fell squarely within Chief Hancock's land. And this was a problem, right? Because they came in, this is shortly after he had vandalized the effigy. He had told them time and time again, and so had many other chiefs in the area, you need to ask permission before you come here. You need to ask permission to come into our lands. Furthermore, by asking permission, you're showing me respect. and you respect my authority and my power as a king over my people. And that's fair, right? I think any territory would require the same thing. And they simply, seemingly ignored that. Well, that proved catastrophic for both of them. So there were, I'm going to paraphrase this story, and this is where I was feeling really guilty early in the presentation. But they, some runners captured von Graffenried, Lawson, and 2 of their enslaved peoples and took them back to their village. And they said, once again, these men are violating from these colonies, from Bath, they are violating the requirements to navigate our space and our land. And so Chief Hancock, and for the sake of time, I was going to read something, but I'm going to wait. I'm not going to do it. So what Chief Hancock did is he understood the politics that were happening. These were formal colonies in North Carolina. These were a little bit different than the earlier settlements that were here. These weren't just scattered groups of, 5 or 6, 10 people living in these little isolated spots in the woods or along the river. This was a formal colony, and they had already seen what other tribes had felt and experienced dealing with larger European crowns, such as the Spanish and the French, and of course the English. So he was trying to be very strategic in how he dealt with this situation. So what he decided to do was hold council. So he placed them, and this is not at this moment, this is the next day, what you're looking at. At first he places them on a mat, and then he is sort of hosting them. They give them something to drink, they have food, and they say, okay, tell us what's going on. Tell us why you're here. So they explained to him, we're just looking for grapes. We were just exploring this afternoon. We were not conducting official business. We were enjoying the water and the river and the beauty of the landscape. So he listens. He's calculating and thinking quietly. And his men that are sitting there, and also the women, because the women had power. We talked about that in the second class. So they're lying. They're saying, furthermore, why are you listening to them in this way, Chief Hancock, when this would not be acceptable for anybody else? Why are you being so lenient with them? Does this mean you're getting soft? And so they started questioning his leadership. So what he does is he says, let me think about this, because his community kept prodding him and saying, this isn't like you. This isn't how we conduct ourselves. This isn't how we govern our community. So Chief Hancock says, let me go home. I'm going to rest for the evening. You all stay the night. You're free to move about. We'll host you, and then we'll address this again tomorrow. All right. So von Graffenried and Lawson and their 2 enslaved peoples relaxed. They carried on and were very nervous, but still spent the evening. Some of the native peoples plundered them and their belongings that evening. And so also that evening, there was someone who I didn't put up on our main actors, but Corey Tom came in that evening, and he was presumed to be Seneca. And he starts talking to some of these Tuscarora people that were challenging Hancock, and they said, what is he doing? Why is he being so soft on them? This just represents one small colony of a lot of colonies. I've been up in New York. You should see how many of them are up there. You should come down through Philadelphia and see what that looks like. This is nothing. You guys have no idea. You're going to let Hancock stay weak like that? So he gets them really riled up that evening. They go back over to Chief Hancock's house and they say, hey, Cortom's right. What is it that you're doing? We need to question them again, right? So he comes back and he says he was going to let them go. And hang on, let me get my story straight here. Before he could come back the next day, they thought they were free to go. But then they decided that they wanted to retrieve the goods that had been lifted off of them. They should have gotten the heck out of there. So after the guys have already come over the evening before, got Chief Hancock riled up, right? He comes back. They're still lingering around later that morning. They could have gone at daylight. They were free to go. And he says, we're going to hold another trial. And to prove that he wasn't weak in front of his people and to kind of think about things in a different way, he decided, in a nutshell, that they were guilty. And that also, as they're going through this kind of testimony again, the thing that didn't behoove John Lawson well, as many of you probably know, he gets very aggressive. He's frustrated, he's tired, he's on edge, and he kind of barks back at Chief Hancock and some of the other leaders. Then they find him guilty, and what they decide to do is to execute Lawson, and de Graffen smoothly talks his way out of it. And he even said when there was a break after they had found them guilty, I keep saying de Graffen, Graffen Reed. Do y'all ever have those names where you retrain your brain to do something? That's one of those names. He says, why did you say all of those things? Essentially paraphrasing in 21st century, why didn't you keep your cool? You know, why? And he says, and Lawson says, I'm tired, I'm frustrated. We've said the same things over and over again. He says, you should not have gotten aggressive. It's pretty much sealed your fate. And it did. And so Hancock authorized the women to decide what his punishment should be. It was pretty graphic. Do you guys know? I don't want to. It was bad. Get the book. And there was some torture. There might have been some little pine needle stakes involved and fire. And so that was the end of Lawson. And in fact, I think one of the enslaved people gets away and the other one is also executed. And Chrystal, let's say that, comes back and he is mortified and he gives his testimony about what happened. So that was between the day of September the 19th and the 20th is when Lawson is executed. So what we're seeing here is actually the second kind of trial that they give to him. And what they do is interesting to sort of, how would you say, disrespect them in a way, to kind of take away their pomp and circumstance and their power. What do you guys see that's missing? Their clothes. Who said it? Someone said their wigs are gone. They took off their hats and their wigs and they threw them in the river. They have stripped them down of their identity and their power, right? These are just simple men that have messed with the wrong people, okay? So this is it. This sparks off. A lot of things start happening. So in 1708, of course, Bath was founded, 12 houses and about 50 people. They were trading in naval stores, furs, and tobacco as an import, and it became North Carolina's first port of entry in North Carolina. There was a grist mill and a shipyard, and Bath was well on its way. Well, on September 23rd of 1711, in response to all of these ill events that were happening, the Tuscarora War begins with the massacre at Bath. And we're all familiar with that story. And that was very violent and very brutal and even horrific. And the violence and some of the ways in which people were unalived, my granddaughter has taught me proper 21st century wording, was beyond comprehension for the settlers and really just shook them to their core, and they thought that it was just beyond what a human being was capable of. But the reason that the Tuscarora went about, especially with the minister's family, doing the things that they did, was to send a clear message. They wanted it to rattle their soul. They wanted it to be disturbing. They wanted them to leave, essentially. And they thought if they were to do these things in their own way of thinking, and we really have to qualify that and kind of place ourselves within time, that this would be something that would not only signal to this colony, but other colonies, that this area, what even would become New Bern, was not to be settled. This was going to remain their homelands, and they were fighting for that. And so that was one of the reasons that the massacre at Bath was the way it was. And then we know what happens after. There had to be a retaliation. And so Governor Hyde reaches out for assistance to attack the Tuscarora, and he calls up to Pennsylvania to Spotswood, Governor Spotswood. And Governor Spotswood says, hey, we have our hands full here. We are dealing with the Iroquois and other tribes up in this area, other Algonquin peoples. There's no way that we can offer assistance to you. You're kind of on your own. And this was to be expected. The Lord's proprietor should have protected you. They should have empowered you. They should have given you more arms. They should have never underestimated these native nations. So then Hyde reaches down into South Carolina, and the call was answered by Colonel John Barnwell, who goes on to be known as Tuscarora Jack. Now, we mentioned briefly about native slavery, and we covered more of that in class 2. So when Barnwell, coming in from South Carolina, has to muster a militia because they had almost no money to engage in what literally was a war, and a war between two countries, between the Tuscarora Nation and their allies and the English government, because these were English colonies. When they mustered to have people volunteer for his militia, he had about 300 Indian men show up from about 20 different nations throughout the Carolinas. He had less than 100 white men show up to militia. And why do you think that is? That's going to be my class 2 people that were here. We took attendance on earlier. Why do you think that is, that all of those Indians from all of these different nations showed up? Say it again? Because of native slavery. So there was a debt to pay, right? And that's who made up Barnwell's militia. And so very methodically, he comes into the area, and they start engaging in warfare. And this was not a theater of war. This was guerrilla warfare for certain. This was an Indian fought war. This was not people agreeing to line up on the battlefield at 1 p.m. We're going to line up and shoot at each other for a couple of lines, and then we're going to retreat according to how many losses were counted. This was much more brutal than that. And this happened right here where we are right now. This war raged up and down the coast of North Carolina. So as it moves forward, I'm going to move here. Barnwell had to enlist James Moore and Maurice Moore. So if any of you all know about the Moores in South Carolina, the James Moore the first or senior was a notorious Indian fighter and was the first governor of South Carolina. So his sons had a little bit of an experience with dealing with Indian wars, and so they brought that knowledge with them. And so the Tuscarora War lasted from September the 10th, 1711 to February 11th of 1715. The war resulted in a British victory, and the Tuscarora, well, this is kind of paraphrasing a little fast, but, well, hold on, let me see. I don't want to go that fast. Let me go here. I'm sorry. So the Tuscarora War rages on, and they are very successful. The Tuscarora are savvy. They also have the home field advantage here, right? They knew the land. We talked about bounded space. They knew the waters, the swamps, the creeks. They knew the landscape, who their allies were, where to hide out, where to sabotage and attack Barnwell and the Moores units. And so, but they start getting weary over a couple of years. And what they decide to do was probably the worst decision they could have done. And they decide to build a bunker. And this bunker is over around Snow Hill, North Carolina. How many of you have been to the memorial site in Snow Hill? Okay. Not far from here, probably about 30 or 40 minutes. They decide to build a bunker. And they thought, why don't we try to fight them back the way they're fighting us? And we've got to stop running all over the landscape, engaging in these military battles. So they take, I think it was several hundred people, and they put them in this bunker. They had snipe holes and sentinels that were around this bunker. And so Colonel James Moore could not have been happier, because he knew exactly what to do with that. They were static, they weren't moving, and pretty much all of them were in one place. What he did is he took kegs of gunpowder, and he created a boundary line of kegs of gunpowder around that fort. And it took him about 3 days, and the soldiers or the Indian warriors that were in that fort tried to stop them. They were sabotaging the kegs, they were covering up the powder lines, but there were just too many among James Moore's men. And he was successful at creating this boundary line, and he blew it up. And we can see that hundreds of Tuscarora people were killed. Men, women, and children lost their lives fighting for their homelands, fighting just to live where they were from, protect their waters, their lands, their cemeteries, their worldview, their way of life. And if you have an opportunity to go to Fort Naroka, you certainly should, because it is a very spiritual, reverent space. So what leaves the fate of the Tuscarora as we've moved through this very quickly? Beginning in 1713, many of the surviving Tuscarora accepted the invitation of the 5 nations in New York to join them. Thus began a long exodus from North Carolina. And it took, some say about 90 years, some say about 30 years, but it took time to convince people to join them, to go up there. Some left immediately, some it took a little bit longer. Now here's what's interesting. After the first pass of Tuscaroras went to New York, the 5 nations said to them, things are changing rapidly in our world. These settlements are growing faster, they're populating faster. All of you that want to come must come now. And they said, if you do not join us, we cannot protect you. We are struggling to protect ourselves up here. We are cutting you off culturally. You stay there, you're your own people, and we're here. And we're not going to keep coming back and forth. So it was a little bit of sort of excommunicating family, if you will, for their own protections on either end. About 10 years later, give or take, North Carolina ended up creating a reservation called Indian Woods and placed Native peoples on this reservation in Bertie County. It's interesting because they were also designated land. And so with this land, they were initially going to be able to try to offer land leases. And there were about 7 or 8 men, white men, that were going to help them navigate these land leases. And that goes terribly wrong really fast. They can't keep up with these vast tracts of land leases. East Carolina, there's a great essay that talks more about this. And they end up losing this reservation land, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller for them to live on because of the land leases, and then essentially they lose a lot of land. There was also Lake Mattocks Reservation was created for Ally tribes and a few other tribes in North Carolina. And then others scatter. They settle in other communities. They take refuge in other areas. They move to distant parts of the Carolinas. They ally or join other tribes. And what we're left with is North Carolina had one sentiment after the Tuscarora War: no more cultural Indians. And I talk about this a lot in the museum. And quite simply put, cultural Indians had caused so much problems and conflict for this growing North Carolina, this new place to settle and establish itself. The other colonies had already experienced all of this warfare, all of these problems. And so what North Carolina decides to do around 1730 is to say that the best version of an Indian is a good Christian farmer. And even my mom, when you would ask her and say about things from her past or when her childhood or Indian history, she would say, babe, the only thing we've ever been are good Christian farmers. And that lets you know how long that indoctrination had lasted. And then a cultural Indian was a dead Indian. And North Carolina begins to put out rewards for scalp locks. They also at the same time put out rewards for wolf hides. That was also seen as a nuisance and a danger on the landscape. So, and let me say this real quick. This is important. When there's young Native people, or Native people in general, and tonight we saw a wonderful presentation of Kea dancing, and Ethan and Chloe dancing and singing, and it was performative, and it felt authentic. Just know that there was a time where that was illegal, and there was a time that that would have gotten them killed. So what you saw tonight, that dance and that song brought back here to this space, was power. A couple of 100 years in the making, right? And Tuscarora people do have a presence here and they visit, but it's not the same. So when young people are asked, why don't you speak your language anymore? Why don't you practice your culture? Why don't you do the things that Indians do? Then we have to say and give an explanation and feel less than. And we're not real and we're not worthy anymore because we're not, cool like the real Indians, that romanticized version of an Indian, right? The same version of ourselves that posed a threat and a danger and was a nuisance on the land that we came from. That's problematic. So what I tell young people, especially in the museum, is you're not responsible for answering that question. The violence that was brought against you to fight for your homes, to defend your honor and your people, it's not your responsibility to explain why you don't have that anymore, because that was not a decision for your people to make. That was forced on you. You don't have to explain it, and you don't have to feel less than. You don't have to feel like you're not authentic or real, because you're as real as you ever were. The blood that courses through your veins, the fact that you can still say you're Indian and hold your head proud, the fact that you can still say, or that you can say even, I'm Indian, and you can say your tribal name. That's an honor. And in all honesty, it's a miracle. So let me unpack this real quick just to understand. Cultural Indian, culture is not just shared. Kea couldn't have, just as an example tonight, he couldn't have just stood out there by himself. He could have, but it was more powerful when there were three of them, right? It'd been more powerful if there was a whole room of them, right? That language he spoke, Ethan understood it. Kayla understood it. Or I'm sorry, Chloe understood it, right? So if you have culture, you have to share that among a group. And if you share culture, and what is culture? Religion, worldview, language, values, commitment to family, connection to place, right? If you share culture, then you're also a political body, right? And if you're a political body, then you want to defend your people. You want to defend your rights. You want to defend what's yours. You want to defend what's honorable. You want to defend where you come from, your origin story, your God, your religion, all of those things. All of us do. But that's a political Indian. A cultural Indian is a political Indian. And again, a cultural Indian was a dead Indian. So a good Christian farmer was the best version of us. There are 8 tribes in North Carolina. We are proud people. We descend from all of these folks that we've covered in these classes. We are Southern. We are part of the warp and weft of this community. We work together. We live together. We're intermarried with one another. And we're still here. So please, if you have opportunities, engage with Native communities across North Carolina. Honor us and our peoples, our shared history. We made it. We're here today, all of us in New Bern, talking about this history. Most of all, this evening, if Chrystal would come here, I would like to thank you for having the guts to share this story. The luxury of time of 3 classes to unpack a very dense, difficult history to share with the public. This is North Carolina's history, and this is who we are. We're not afraid of it. We're owning it. It's problematic, but it's who and where we come from. This museum. Your leadership is what brings us into the 21st century, and we need people like you. There's more to Tryon Palace than a beautifully decorated home or wonderful exhibitions. There's a story among us, and you've got the guts and courage to do it, and I applaud all of the staff who help you, your board, your donors for putting the money behind this, you all for attending and your $10 to get you in here and hear that. We're all making it happen. This is groundbreaking across the United States. Thank you, Chrystal. I love you. I love you.
I hate to do housekeeping after that. But thank you, Nancy, for your bravery and for your intellect and for your commitment to North Carolina, its Indian people, and not just its Indian people, to all of North Carolina. What Nancy has done is to pull together a collective history, the history of 3 continents converging, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, or what would be called the Americas. And so we're doing this together, and we can't do this without all of you. So I thank you all for coming for the past 3 North Carolina community class programs. If it weren't for the public interest, we wouldn't be able to pull this off. And my hope is that you will continue to walk with us. We're doing this together. We're talking about this hard history. Some of it is hard. Some of it is triumphant. There's a lot to be proud of. And I think it's important for us to come together as communities, which is why we're calling this community class. So stick with us. We're going to continue on this journey, and I'm going to lean on Nancy and other public historians and intellectuals and educators, regular folks, to talk about North Carolina's amazing history, particularly Eastern North Carolina. And our goal was to put the East on the map. The East, in a derivative of Outcast, the East has something to say, right? And so I want to thank the amazing staff members, the commissioners, and the foundation folks. Would you just raise your hand, because you are important. Thank you for being here tonight. And I want to, yes. We've got some amazing things happening at Tryon Palace. If you haven't purchased a ticket for Candlelight, please do so. December 14th and December 21st will be Candlelight. And I'm happy to announce that Joe Brown's band is going to be performing at 6 and 8 o'clock on both evenings. So make sure you purchase your ticket and join that celebration and walk through the palace. It's going to be pristine and beautiful, and there are lots of amazing stories we're going to tell about Tryon Palace for Candlelight. Thank you for joining us tonight. Continue to look to Tryon Palace for your edutainment needs. Look at our website, call us. We'd love your feedback, and we are working on some amazing programming for 2025. For community class, for colonial cocktails, and for In Conversation at Tryon Palace. Thank you so much. Be safe. Have a good night.